Amma. If I don't wake up, will I still have a daddy in heaven? The hospital hallway falls silent. Jang Seo-yeon squeezes her eyes shut, choking back the sob clawing up her throat. She promised herself she'd never cry in front of him again, not since Hyunwoo walked out and never looked back. But then, heavy footsteps. A presence. Warm, certain, immovable. A large hand covers hers around the tiny dinosaur. She looks up into the eyes of Kwon Tae-jun, the man who owns this hospital, who doesn't do emotion, who has never once looked at anyone like this. He won't have to wonder, asterisk, he says quietly. Asterisk, not anymore. Asterisk. 6-year-old Shin Min-jun stepped out of the elevator onto the 42nd floor of KT Holdings as if he owned the building. His small sneakers squeaked across the polished marble floor, one lace undone and a faded dinosaur stitched on the side. Across his chest hung his mother's old work bag, stuffed with a juice box, 3 toy dinosaurs, and a folded drawing he had been working on for days. Behind him, his mother Jang Seo-yeon hurried after him in near panic. Min-jun, stop. You cannot just walk into. The lady downstairs said 42, the boy replied confidently. She said the bathroom was on 42, Seo-yeon whispered urgently. But Min-jun had already wandered ahead. The receptionist stared in polite horror as the child marched through the corporate office. At the far end of the floor stood a large glass office with its door slightly open. Inside sat Kwon Tae-jun, the 34-year-old CEO of KT Holdings, a powerful investment firm leader known for his cold reputation and sharp business instincts. Min-jun paused and looked inside. Yama, he whispered loudly, that man looks lonely. The entire office seemed to stop breathing. Before Seo-yeon could grab him, Min-jun pushed open the glass door and walked straight into the CEO's office. Tae-jun looked up from his documents, clearly unprepared for a small boy climbing into the chair across from his enormous desk. With complete seriousness, Min-jun unzipped his bag and placed a small green toy dinosaur on the desk. That's Seji, he explained. He's shy, but he's actually brave. Seo-yeon rushed in, mortified, apologizing repeatedly while trying to pull her son away. She explained that she had a job interview downstairs and that her son had simply slipped away from her. But before leaving, Min-jun asked Tae-jun a direct question. Are you someone's dad? The room fell silent. Tae-jun looked at the boy for a long moment before answering quietly, no. Min-jun thought about it and asked, how come? Embarrassed, Seo-yeon tried to stop him, but the boy continued with innocent honesty. He explained that his own father had left before he was born. His mother said the man had important things to do, but Min-jun believed the truth was simpler, he just didn't want to stay. For a brief moment, something softened in Tae-jun's usually rigid expression. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. Min-jun shrugged with the quiet resilience of a child used to difficult truths. It's okay. My mom is really good at it anyway. Before leaving, he pushed the dinosaur further across the desk toward Tae-jun. You can borrow Seji if you want, he said. He helps when things feel big. Then he ran back to the elevator with his embarrassed mother. When the doors closed, Tae-jun remained alone in his office, staring at the tiny green dinosaur now sitting among stacks of expensive corporate reports. He didn't move it. A 6-year-old boy walked into the coldest CEO's office, and left behind a tiny toy dinosaur. But what he really left behind was a question that could change everything. What happens when a lonely child meets a man who never planned to be a father? Subscribe and follow the story to see how one innocent moment begins to change all their lives. Seo-yeon's interview did not fail in a dramatic way. Nothing was spilled, no arguments happened, and no obvious mistakes were made. It simply went quietly, efficiently wrong. Arriving 10 minutes late with her 6-year-old son, Min-jun, already put her at a disadvantage. Explaining to the interviewer, HR manager Oh Jae-yul, that her child had briefly wandered onto the CEO's floor did not help either. Seo-yeon tried to present the situation calmly and professionally, insisting that everything had been resolved and nothing was damaged. Jae-yul listened politely and gave the familiar corporate smile, the one that always meant the same thing, "We'll call you." They never did. That night at exactly 9:47 p.m., Seo-yeon received the rejection email while sitting at the small kitchen table of her apartment. Min-jun was asleep in the next room while a cup of instant coffee slowly grew cold beside her laptop. She read the email twice before quietly closing it and opening the spreadsheet she used to track job applications. 17 entries filled the column labeled pending. After updating the list, 12 now read NO. 3 still said pending, and 2 said callback, follow-up. She circled those 2 in red before beginning the nightly calculations she knew by heart: rent, utilities, groceries, daycare, and the hospital installment payments left over from when Min-jun had an ear infection 6 months earlier. The thought of the bill alone made her pause and breathe deeply. One thing at a time, she reminded herself. 14 months earlier, Seo-yeon had arrived in Seoul with Min-jun, 2 suitcases, and the address of a cousin who had promised a temporary couch. The few weeks had stretched into 3 months before the cousin's husband began complaining about space and noise. Determined not to overstay, Seo-yeon found a small third-floor apartment with a noisy radiator and signed the lease using the last of her savings. Long before that, in Busan, Min-jun's father Oh Hyun-woo had told her he wasn't ready to become a father. He promised support for whatever she chose to do. In reality, that promise amounted to 1 bank transfer 6 years ago and then complete silence. Seo-yeon had made her choice, and she had continued making it every single day since. She worked hard not to be bitter. Bitterness was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially with Min-jun, who seemed able to sense emotions as easily as weather. He had inherited her sensitivity and his father's eyes. She tried to appreciate the first and ignore the second. After finishing her work, she checked on Min-jun. He slept sprawled across his bed, clutching a blue triceratops. The green stegosaurus he had given the CEO, Seji, had been replaced tonight by another dinosaur named Rory. Seo-yeon tucked the blanket around him and whispered quietly, "I'm going to figure it out." 3 days later, an unexpected call came. It wasn't from either of the 2 companies she had circled in red. It was from KT Holdings. The woman on the phone explained that Seo-yeon's application had been flagged for direct consideration by Mr. Kwon's office, specifically Kwon Tae-jun, the CEO whose office her son had accidentally invaded. Seo-yeon stood frozen in her kitchen, trying to understand why a man like him would notice her application at all. She had built her life on not needing anyone to save her. But Min-jun's daycare payment was due in 11 days, the radiator was knocking again, and 12 entries on her spreadsheet still said NO. So she accepted the interview scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. This time, she would not bring Min-jun. Thursday arrived in the rushed, imperfect way important days often do. Seo-yeon's morning was chaotic. The hot water ran out during her shower, Min-jun couldn't find his toy dinosaur Rory, and the bus arrived late. Still, she managed to reach KT Holdings at 9:58 a.m. The same receptionist from her previous visit recognized her but remained professionally composed. Instead of sending Seo-yeon to HR, the receptionist informed her that Kwon Tae-jun would conduct the interview himself. Surprised, Seo-yeon followed an assistant through the polished marble hallway to the familiar glass office at the end of the floor. Tae-jun stood by the window overlooking Seoul, hands clasped behind his back. When she entered, she noticed something immediately. The small green toy dinosaur Min-jun had left behind, Seji, was still sitting on Tae-jun's desk. He asked her to sit and began the interview without ceremony. Tae-jun reviewed her resume with quiet precision, confirming details about her previous job in Busan and the company that had closed due to financial collapse. When he asked about her move to Seoul, she answered calmly that she had come with her 6-year-old son. Tae-jun briefly acknowledged Min-jun's unusual honesty during their first meeting before sliding a document across the desk. It was an employment contract. At first glance, it looked standard: job title, salary, benefits, confidentiality clauses. But as Seo-yeon read it, she realized something was different. The salary was far higher than expected, nearly 3 times what the original job listing offered. The position itself had been reclassified as senior analyst for special projects, reporting directly to Tae-jun's office. Even more surprising were the benefits: flexible working hours to accommodate childcare, full family health coverage with no waiting period, and an education benefit for dependents. Confused, Seo Yeon asked why he had restructured an entire position for someone who had arrived late and allowed her child to wander into the CEO's office. Tae-jun answered simply, "She came back." Most people would have been too embarrassed after such an incident, but Seo Yeon returned without anger, shame, or excuses. She had apologized only for the inconvenience. Combined with her strong organizational skills and experience managing record systems, Tae-jun believed she would be valuable to his office. He insisted the offer was not charity but a business decision. A well-run company needed capable employees, and capable employees needed realistic working conditions, including support for childcare responsibilities. The offer was powerful. Seo Yeon knew it could change everything for her and Min-jun. Which was exactly why she hesitated. Instead of accepting immediately, she folded the contract and said she needed time to think. Tae-jun appeared genuinely surprised. He clearly wasn't used to people walking away from such offers. Seo Yeon explained calmly that she could only work well in a position she fully understood. If she didn't understand the role, she wouldn't perform properly. She promised to give her answer by Monday and left the office. Alone in the elevator, the tension finally released and her body shook with the weight of the decision. In the end, she accepted the job on Friday. She almost refused, but she thought about Min-jun, the mounting bills, and the education benefits offered for his future. She also thought about the powerful man who had kept a small green toy dinosaur on his desk for 4 days. And she decided that sometimes it was okay to let someone open a door, as long as she was the one who chose whether to walk through it. He offered her a job that could change her life, and she almost walked away. Because Seo Yeon didn't want charity. She only wanted a chance to survive. But sometimes the door that scares you the most is the one meant for you. Follow the story to see what happens when Seo Yeon steps into Kwon Tae-jun's world, and how one small dinosaur started changing everything. By Monday, Seo Yeon had officially started at KT Holdings, and within days, 3 things became clear. First, Kwon Tae-jun was professionally extraordinary. He absorbed information at a terrifying speed, retained every detail she provided, and made decisions with the unshakable certainty of a man who had never second-guessed himself out loud. Working for him felt like being handed a finely tuned instrument and being told to keep pace, and she did. Second, the office was baffled by her. Introduced as a senior analyst reporting directly to the CEO, she had bypassed the usual chain of command, leaving colleagues silently calculating who she was and where she had come from. Seo Yeon answered questions with the one tool she trusted, her work. Third, Tae-jun had no idea how to exist around a child. This became glaringly apparent on her 4th day when Min-jun's daycare called. He had a fever. Seo Yeon knocked on Tae-jun's office door at 2:17 p.m., already calculating how she could complete her report remotely. She explained the situation and offered to work from home, but Tae-jun cut her off. "Go," he said simply. "The summary can wait 2 hours." She left. What she didn't anticipate was Tae-jun acting instinctively 40 minutes later. He cancelled an impromptu meeting and, uncertain how to help, called his assistant to arrange delivery of children's fever medicine and an ice pop to her neighborhood. He did not text instructions himself. He stood for a full minute before delegating. Seo Yeon sent him a short acknowledgement. "You didn't have to do that." He replied, "The work functions better when employees aren't distracted." She decided, for now, to let him have that. 6 weeks later, Min-jun returned to Tae-jun's office entirely by accident. A Saturday school holiday had left Seo Yeon scrambling to complete a filing project. She set Min-jun up in a conference room with his dinosaurs, snacks, and a promise of ice cream, checking on him every 20 minutes. When she finally entered, she found him in Tae-jun's office, sitting across from the CEO, narrating a business meeting among his 3 dinosaurs. Tae-jun, in the middle of an 11-figure investment call, did not interrupt. He merely allowed his eyes to drop to the toys once and the corner of his mouth to move, just slightly. Min-jun explained, "The T-Rex is the CEO, but he's actually not very scary." The Stegosaurus does most of the real work. Do you want to hear about the Triceratops? Tae-jun calmly responded, tell me about the Triceratops. He listened as if learning a language he'd never been offered, sitting still, absorbing, and engaging in the child's world without pretense or forced patience. Later, alone in the subway, Seo-yeon held Min-jun asleep against her arm and reflected. A man who commanded billions of dollars had paused to genuinely listen to a 6-year-old. He wasn't tolerating, he was learning. And despite the extraordinary moment, she reminded herself quietly not to make it something it wasn't. She had become an expert at survival, and she knew this was no exception. Seo-yeon was in the middle of a systems audit during her second month at KT Holdings when her phone buzzed with a number she had spent years training herself not to recognize. It was Oh Hyun-woo, Min-jun's father. For 2 years, she had avoided his calls, but after several attempts, she picked up, refusing to let fear dictate her response. His voice was exactly as she remembered, warm, practiced, familiar. He wanted to meet her and, disturbingly, her son. Her answer was immediate, no. She hung up, keeping the encounter tightly contained within her control. For 37 seconds, she allowed herself to pause, then returned to her work with the calm, focused efficiency that had defined her life since Hyun-woo's disappearance 6 years ago. 11 days later, a registered letter arrived at her apartment, formal and expensive, outlining Hyun-woo's legal request for acknowledgement of paternity and visitation rights for Min-jun. The language was careful, citing Min-jun's welfare repeatedly, but it ignored the 6 years of silence, the single token bank transfer, and the absence of birthdays or calls. Clipped to the letter was a photograph, Hyun-woo smiling with a woman holding a ring. Seo-yeon understood immediately, he was getting married, and her son had become a complication that needed formal management. She was not a past inconvenience, she was a loose end, and Min-jun was the knot tying it all together. Despite the sting, Seo-yeon maintained her composure. She put the letter in a folder, made a cup of tea she didn't drink, and called the only person she trusted in Seoul for guidance, Tae-jun's assistant, Oh Se-jin. After a brief hold, Tae-jun himself answered. Without needing to explain fully, he understood from her silence that something serious had occurred. Seo-yeon requested a family law lawyer, emphasizing that she would cover the cost, she only needed a reliable name. Tae-jun's response was measured, steady, and quietly protective, I'll handle the lawyer. He insisted it wasn't charity, she could repay him if it mattered. Seo-yeon, surprised by his offer, agreed, and he suggested deducting the expense from her upcoming bonuses. A small laugh escaped her in relief and disbelief. After the call, she sat in her kitchen, folder before her, the legal threat lingering but the room feeling marginally warmer than before. She was still meticulous about her emotions, filing them away like spreadsheets, but for the first time, she considered whether being that controlled was necessary. Somewhere across Seoul, in his high-rise office, a small green toy dinosaur watched from the corner of a billionaire's desk, silent and steadfast, as if keeping vigil over the unfolding events. Seo-yeon had not lost control, but for the first time, she allowed herself to be just slightly unsettled, aware that the past had returned, but confident she could protect her son and navigate whatever came next. In Kwon Tae-jun's office, a photograph sat on the bottom shelf of his bookcase that nobody ever asked about. Not hidden, but quietly respected, the unspoken rule of not probing certain parts of the man who commanded billions. The photo showed a young Tae-jun, around 7 or 8, standing beside a man in a factory uniform, his father, Kwon Tae-jun. Neither smiled, but they were present, captured in a moment that spoke of steadfastness rather than performance. Tae-jun had worked in a steel factory in Incheon for 31 years, taking the early shift to be home by 4. Every evening, he patiently guided Tae-jun through math problems at the kitchen table, steady and unglamorous, giving lessons not only in numbers but in reliability, focus, and presence. He was a man of few words, but in every essential way, he was there, consistently, without fanfare. When he died of a stroke when Tae-jun was 19, 2 months into his first university year, Tae-jun sat alone in his dormitory and understood for the first time the irreversible nature of loss. His father was gone, and with him went the quiet, essential lessons of stability and care. Everything Tae-jun had built since then, KT Holdings, the reputation, the meticulous control over his office and employees, was rooted in that loss. He channeled his grief into discipline and ambition, creating an environment where those under him would never go without, even as he had never allowed anyone to take responsibility for him. He had dated, functionally, but remained emotionally guarded, often called cold or ambitious by those who misunderstood the driving force behind his rigor. The photograph, a symbol of his father's influence, remained private until a Thursday evening in November. It was the culmination of Seo Yun's consultations with attorney Baek-jun SEO regarding Oh Hyun-woo's petition for visitation rights that brought Tae-jun to speak of his past. Seo Yun updated him on the legal advice. The petition was weak but not dismissible, and documenting Min-jun's stable environment would be crucial. She shared her son's innocent question, why did Hyun-woo want to see him now? Tae-jun listened quietly, and then, without premeditation, he spoke of his own father. My father worked a factory shift for 31 years so he could be home by 4, Tae-jun said. He didn't have money. He didn't have a title. He had a kitchen table and math books, and he was there, every day. He died when I was 19. I have thought about that kitchen table every day since. He admitted that when Min-jun had once asked why Tae-jun wasn't someone's dad, he didn't have an answer. He didn't know how to be what his father had been, and he hadn't been willing to be anything less. Seo Yun understood the gravity of the moment and remained silent, witnessing a rare opening in the carefully guarded man. She glanced at the photograph, a father who had been quietly, unfailingly present. He sounds like someone Min-jun would have loved, she said softly. Tae-jun's face shifted, a momentary, deep, undisguised response. Yes, he said. He would have. They sat together quietly, neither reaching for a phone, neither pretending elsewhere to be. Outside, Seoul went on, indifferent, while on the bottom shelf of a 42nd floor bookcase, a man in a factory uniform stood with his hand on a boy's shoulder, permanent, steady, the kind of goodness that quietly shapes a life. He never planned to share the truth, but sometimes the past finds its way forward. Kwon Tae-jun built an empire on control, but a photograph of his father taught him what it means to stay. As Seo Yun fights for Min-jun's future, both of them must decide what it means to be there, every day, without fail. In December, Seo Yun's quiet, disciplined routine is disrupted by the ordinary chaos of life, a 6-year-old son, Min-jun, having a nightmare and waking her at 2 a.m., a spilled cup of coffee across a report she'd painstakingly prepared, and the pressure of an upcoming court date concerning Hyun-woo's petition for visitation. Despite exhaustion and anxiety, she continues her work with precision, differentiating between real crises and minor setbacks. Tae-jun notices her fatigue and silently offers support. He provides a fresh cup of coffee, acknowledges the court date, and validates her fears without intrusion or forced comfort. Seo Yun is struck by the quiet, factual way he communicates care, different from the empty sympathy she's accustomed to, and feels herself slightly unmoored by it. She continues working late into the night, methodically organizing documents as a way to manage her anxiety. Later that evening, she discovers that Min-jun has fallen at daycare, possibly spraining his wrist. She rushes to him, with Tae-jun already anticipating the situation and offering to drive her, demonstrating attentiveness, practicality, and an unspoken willingness to step in when needed. At the hospital, Tae-jun interacts with Min-jun with measured seriousness, humor, and empathy, validating the child's experience while creating an atmosphere of safety and calm. Min-jun, wrapped in Tae-jun's oversized jacket for warmth, rests in the back seat as they drive home. Seo Yun, sitting beside them, observes the city at night and the subtle, quiet support that has quietly grown around her and her son. The chapter closes with Seo Yun finally allowing herself a moment of emotional release. Sitting alone in her apartment after putting Min-jun to bed, she acknowledges the warmth, relief, and comfort she has received, small gestures of care that have the power to penetrate her carefully constructed emotional armor. The photograph appeared on a Tuesday morning. Seo Yun first saw it on her phone at 7:43 a.m., sent by 3 different people within minutes, Se-jin, her cousin, and a former Busan colleague. It wasn't scandalous, just a blurry picture taken near her apartment, Tae-jun holding the door, Seo-yeon half-turned laughing, and Min-jun triumphantly holding snacks. They looked, simply, like a family. The headline read, Kwon Tae-jun's secret family? KT holding CEO photographed with mystery woman and child. By the time Seo-yeon reached the 42nd floor, multiple outlets had picked it up, some identifying her and her address. One even unearthed a 6-year-old Busan photo of her and Hyunwoo. Tabloids added inflammatory captions, single mother employee and billionaire CEO, love in the office? And speculated on Hyunwoo's ongoing custody case. Seo-yeon closed every tab, pressed her phone face down, and spent 12 minutes breathing deliberately. Sejin appeared, saying Tae-jun wanted to see her. He was at the window, jaw set, radiating controlled anger, not at her, but at the intrusion into their lives. They printed your address, she said. I've had it removed, he replied. It'll be down within the hour. My legal team is preparing a statement. Seo-yeon cut him off. Her concern wasn't the company or the press, it was Min-jun. His court date was in 4 weeks. A photograph of him was online, with speculation about his family. I have to tell him the truth, she said. Simplified. He can handle more than people think. Tae-jun asked if she'd allow him to be there. She hesitated, but he explained gently that he was in the photo too, and Min-jun deserved to hear from someone who could assure him nothing had changed. Throughout the day, Seo-yeon worked methodically, answering messages and watching the outlets remove her address. At 4, she picked up Min-jun, who was blissfully absorbed in a drawing of dinosaurs having a tea party. She calmly explained that some people had written stories about them, not entirely true. Min-jun processed it simply, are we famous now? A little, she said. She absorbed the moment, realizing how resilient and loved he was. But her relief was short-lived. The real disruption came from Hyunwoo himself, a voluntary interview with a mainstream outlet 3 days later, portraying himself as a father reconnecting with his son, questioning the environment Min-jun was being raised in, and implying Seo-yeon's close relationship with Tae-jun could be inappropriate. Baekjun SEO called it a transparent tactic, likely to backfire. Tae-jun, after reading it, made a decisive move, contacting the lawyer directly. Afterwards, Seo-yeon confronted him in his office. She needed to know what he was doing, what he was to them, before she could manage it all. His response was calm, steady, and loaded with unspoken weight. What do you want me to be? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I want to find out, Then we find out, he said. In that quiet office, a man built on discipline, grief, and care settled into a shared purpose with her, one grounded in protection, love, and the family they were quietly building. Min-jun was rushed to the hospital late Wednesday night with acute appendicitis. Seo-yeon arrived at the emergency ward by 12:30 a.m., and by 1 a.m., he was prepped for surgery. She stood in the hallway, holding his hand until the doors closed behind him, feeling the weight of waiting alone. She called Tae-jun at 1:06 a.m., not out of necessity, but because he had become the person she instinctively turned to. He arrived at 1:43 a.m., silent and present, without explanation, embodying steady reassurance. He sat beside her, not touching her, simply being there. He'll be okay, he said, confident in the surgical team. She believed him but needed his presence to hold her own anxiety. Min-jun had pressed a small green stegosaurus, Seji, into her hand before surgery, saying, he's brave for both of us. Tae-jun studied the toy, quietly acknowledging the boy's courage. He didn't get that from nowhere, he said. Seo-yeon knew exactly what he meant. Tae-jun admitted he wasn't Min-jun's biological father but emphasized that his concern wasn't professional, it was personal. In the sterile, humming hospital corridor, with the surgery ongoing beyond the double doors, their silent connection held the weight of truth slowly realized and now undeniable. The operation lasted 2 hours and 18 minutes. When the surgeon confirmed it was successful, Seo-yeon exhaled and pressed her hands over her face. Tae-jun placed his hand over hers, steady and warm. In the hospital room, Min-jun awoke groggy, mentioning a dream about pizza. Seo-yeon laughed and cried, overwhelmed by relief and love. Tae-jun stood at the foot of the bed, present without ceremony, as Min-jun acknowledged him. Then came the question that broke through everything, Ajiasi, can you be my dad? Seo-yeon felt the weight of it settle into the room. Tae-jun crouched to the boy's level, meeting his gaze. That is the most important question anyone has ever asked me, he said. He carefully explained he wasn't answering yes immediately, wanting the moment to be right, but assured Min-jun, I am not going anywhere. That is a promise. Do you understand the difference? Min-jun considered this and nodded. Okay. I want pepperoni on the pizza. Tae-jun acknowledged it with a quiet, thoughtful noted. Seo-yeon pressed her hand to her mouth, blinking back tears, aware she had allowed someone into the door she had carefully built for herself. For the first time in a long while, she let herself feel the warmth of connection, real, unguarded, and slowly, irrevocably, part of her life. The court date arrived quietly, and attorney Baek-jun SEO presented 6 years of documented absence, a single bank transfer, and the timing of Oh Hyun-woo's sudden interest, coinciding with his engagement, proving he had no genuine concern for Min-jun. The counter-arguments were careful but unconvincing. The judge ruled that visitation was denied pending a 12-month period of supervised contact initiated by Hyun-woo, meaning nothing would be forced on Min-jun without her consent. Seo-yeon stepped into the cold January air, breathing in relief, and called Tae-jun to report the victory. Min-jun had fully recovered from his surgery and resumed his daily adventures with his dinosaurs. Tae-jun had visited him multiple times during recovery, not as a friend or employer, but as someone slowly deciding if he fit into the small life Seo-yeon had built. On the third visit, he brought a pepperoni pizza, which Min-jun received with solemnity, eating more than medically advised. Min-jun eventually fell asleep between them, trusting Tae-jun completely. Seo-yeon observed quietly, realizing this was how he expressed care, through presence, not words. She was learning about him, and he about her, slowly building understanding and intimacy. In February, Tae-jun told Seo-yeon he loved her in their kitchen, not with ceremony or announcement, but simply, while she washed rice and Min-jun conducted a dinosaur summit in the next room. His declaration was steady, careful, and entirely sincere. She returned his words, and a wall long described as cold dissolved permanently. In March, he asked Min-jun first, at the park with the volcano climbing structure, if he could be part of their lives permanently, the 4 o'clock kind, meaning reliably present. Min-jun considered the term seriously, including the care of his dinosaurs, and agreed. Tae-jun held him, pressing his eyes closed over the boy's head, fully accepting the responsibility he had gradually chosen. Back in their small apartment, the moment culminated with Tae-jun asking Seo-yeon herself to marry him, presenting a simple ring and a promise, he would be there every day, for her and for Min-jun, as long as they allowed. She accepted immediately, letting the emotion flow freely for the first time. Laughter and tears filled the space, blending with the ordinary sounds of the apartment, the radiator knocking, the dinosaurs on their shelves, Min-jun's playful proclamations, as the small, carefully constructed world they had built became, finally, home.